Hello everyone, I hope you all are doing good. So in my today's session, I'm going to cover about the OAuth 2.0 specification or the framework which is used for authentication and authorization. So on that framework, I'm going to explain about the various grant types provided by the framework to access or retrieve the access tokens. Okay, so let's start with it. Okay. According to OAuth 2.0, the client applications or the client types are basically of two types. Okay, one is a public client application and another one is confidential client application. Public client applications are the one which are single page applications which entirely run inside your web browser, okay, or on your mobile application. Okay, and confidential client applications are the one which are basically your web services or microservices which are going to run on the web server machine or the server machine basically. Okay, so the client user or client applications don't they usually won't run on your client machine. Okay, so that is the confidential client application which are completely on server and they are very secure compared to your public client applications. Okay, now based on these two types of client types, okay, there are basically a lot of grant types have been specified. Okay, most common one are the implicit grant type. Okay, authorization code, resource owner credentials, refresh token, client credentials, and device type. There is one more actually which is used to authenticate and authorize your home appliances like television sets. Okay, so these are the various grant types basically specified by the OAuth 2.0 specification or framework. Okay, so now, okay, so most of the public client applications which are basically single page application developed in React, Angular, Vue, okay, the preferred approach has been till now the preferred approach has been the implicit flow. Okay, so in the implicit flow what happens is you basically redirect it to a login page, okay, or a login servers page basically where you will enter your username and password, you authenticate yourself. Once you are successfully authenticated and authorized, okay, basically you will be returned back with access token, okay, with the reply URL that you had configured. Okay, so the access token can be easily extracted from that reply URL which comes back to your application. Okay, so this is the implicit grant type basically, and implicit grant type is always called as two-leg flow. Okay, so only straightforward steps are involved. So first thing, you will be presented with a login server's login homepage where you have to enter your username and password, and the authorization server will directly return the access token to your application, which is a public client application running inside your browser or a mobile phone. Okay, that's why implicit flow always makes use of slash authorize endpoint of your authorization server. Okay, now the authorization server may be a Microsoft Entra Id or Azure Active Directory server, it may be AWS based authorization servers, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. Okay, in my case, I'm referring to Microsoft Entra ID. Okay, so whenever you are going to make use of the implicit flow, okay, what you are going to do is you are basically go to the slash authorize endpoint. Okay, you authorize yourself and you get the token. Okay, guys. Yeah, now the second thing which comes is the authorization code. Okay, authorization code is little strict. Okay, what happens is when you try to access an application or a web API with the authorization grant type, okay, first of all you have to enter your username and password, you have to authenticate yourself. On successful authentication valid and or validation of your credentials, the authorization server will return, okay, an authorization code, okay, an auth code. Okay, what happens once you receive that auth code, you are going to make a call to slash token endpoint of your authorization servers. Okay, so in case of grant type called authorization code, there are two steps. Okay, first you will authorize, first you have to authenticate yourself. Okay, and you have to authorize yourself at this particular endpoint and you have to generate a auth code. Then that auth code you have to send it to slash token endpoint of your authorization server. Okay, so what happens when it goes to slash token endpoint, the authorization code will be verified by the authorization server and then it will return the access token. In case of implicit, the user or the application will directly get access token, but in case of authorization code flow, it is a two-step authorization code first and then the token. That's why this particular grant type is called three-legged flow. Okay, an implicit is a two-legged flow, whereas authorization code is three-legged flow. Okay, resource owner cred, again, resource owner credentials is a mechanism or a grant type where the end user, okay, the resource owner, basically the resource owner of a web application, basically enter his username and password in a form, okay, your application's form, okay, and those credentials will be set to your authorization server slash token endpoint. Okay, this has been kept to have a downward compatibility with the OAuth 1.0 specification. So what happens in this case? You directly present your username and password that will be validated on the authorization server, and it will straight away return the token. Okay, again, resource owner cred is two-legged flow. Okay, like implicit, you are not generating any intermediate code to get the access token. You give your credentials, okay, and the server will verify and it will return the access token. Okay, refresh token, again, same. In case of refresh token also, you will present your client ID, okay, and client secret or your application user's credentials. Okay, so once the server successfully authorizes and authenticates, it will return you a refresh token, which you can use to refresh your token, access token, whenever it expires. Okay, and then comes the client credentials. These are the credentials of your application, basically. Okay, so resource owner credential is basically a user's credential. Always remember, okay? Whereas a client credentials is your application credentials, app ID and app secrets, which you will send to slash token itself directly, and you will get your access token generated. Again, client credentials grant type is also a two-legged flow. Okay, no intermediate codes are required over here. Okay, there's one more variant of the authorization code grant type, basically, which is called authorization code with PKCE, proof code for code exchange. Okay, it's called proof code. PKCE means proof code for code exchange, okay, or access code exchange. What happens is, in case of authorization code with the PKCE, what happens is the client will generate, okay, a string, a random string, basically, which is 42 256 characters long, it seems. Okay, okay, so the same string, basically, it keeps with it, the client application will keep it with it. Okay, and then what it does is it follows the normal authorization code flow, where you have to enter your your user credentials. Okay, once you have been successfully authenticated and authorized, you will be presented with a access token. Okay, now that token will be used by this public client application. Now, in between, if there is any malicious application which tries to make use of this authorization code, okay, it won't succeed, because in order to make further calls, okay, in case of authorization code plus PKC, you have to send that randomly generated PKCE code. Okay, whenever the authorization server checks for that PKCE code, and it verifies whether it's a valid PKCE code for this client application or not. Okay, so it is not only dependent on authorization code, but it also depends on PKCE code. If the PKCE code which you had sent is valid and matches with the authorization server, then only it will return the access token. Okay, so very secure approach, basically. That's why it's a three-legged flow. Okay, so as you would see from this diagram, it's pretty much clear. Okay, single page application or mobile application, these are public client application, and most of the public client applications make use of the implicit flow, but due to security concerns nowadays, people are not preferring it, and further they have started making use of authorization code flow or authorization code plus PKCE. Okay, and also some secure browsers like Safari. In order to be compatible with Safari browser, I think it's a recommended approach to go with authorization code plus PKCE. Okay, in order to authenticate into your authorized public client applications. Okay, so that's the crux. So both implicit grant type and authorization code grant types basically first make a call to slash authorize endpoint of your authentication and authorization server. They will take the code, sorry, only authorization code will take the code and then makes that code to get the token. But in case of implicit, simply go to the authorized endpoint and get your access token generated. Okay, uh, that's the all stuffs I wanted to explain. And when it comes to resource owner creds, if you see the lines, it doesn't go to slash authorize. Okay, Resource owner gets grant type directly goes to slash token endpoint, refresh token directly goes to slash token, and client credentials directly go to slash token endpoint of your authorization server to get access token. Okay. When it comes to consents, one more points I would like to explain over here. Okay. So in case of these consents, explicit consent or implicit consent, okay, you need to provide admin or user consent, right? Okay, so that will happen in case of slash authorize. Okay, basically you will be able to provide explicit consents. Okay, so in case of slash token, as you would see, you will be able to provide the implicit consents also. Okay, so the consent is implicit. Okay, your admin would have given and you can directly make a call and get your token. You won't be represented with a consent page. Okay, if the admin level consent has been provided. Okay, so in case of authorize, yes, you need to provide explicit consent. So whenever you authenticate successfully, you will be presented with a consent page to provide permissions and get user consent on that, and then only you can proceed. Okay guys, so do remember, okay, implicit grant type is most of the times used with the public client applications. Nowadays people are avoiding this due to security concerns. Okay, but till now most of the applications were making use of the single page applications or mobile applications were making use of implicit grant type. Okay, because of its simplicity. Okay, you won't end up in making a lot of round trips. Okay, it's just one way: go to the server, get your token, and continue. Okay, it basically speeds up your application startup or login basically. Okay, and authorization code, as I already explained, two-step process: get the auth code, send it to the authorized, first present your credentials, get a auth code on successful verification. Okay, then send that auth code to slash token in order to get the access token. Okay, so let me show the same stuff with Postman. Okay, so I had created an web API using ASP.NET Core, and I have made it a protected web API basically using Microsoft Entra ID. So if I go to authorization tab, okay, the type I have selected, can you see? Okay, what specification or what type of authorization I'm using? There are a lot of options. Okay, and I have selected OAuth 2.0 type. Okay, now over here, in order to generate a token, okay, see how you will configure a new token. Okay, so token name, and then comes the grant type. First one I am selecting implicit. Okay, so if you see over here, okay, first thing, you have to provide a callback URL. Okay, this is the callback URL that you will be redirected to after your application is authorized. Okay, Postman uses this to extract the authorization code or access token. Okay, in my case I'm using Postman as a client application, that's why it uses this URL to extract the token. But in real-time scenarios, it's a React or Angular SPA applications which basically using this redirect URL, which is nothing but your application URL only, like https colon slash slash some xyz.todo.com. Okay, so that is the callback URL basically, from where it will basically extract your access token. Okay, so that's what they are saying. So in case of implicit flow, okay, if you provide a keen observation, the auth URL is you are going to use is basically authorize. Okay, can you see anywhere the token URL over here? No, you can't see the token URL. Okay, so if I go through the diagram, implicit flow basically makes use of authorize endpoint, and I'm making use of an Microsoft Azure Entra ID based authorization server, which is over here. And if you say the endpoint, I'm preferring to OAuth 2 slash version 2.0 slash authorize. Okay, no token URL in case of implicit flow. Okay, so that's it for the implicit. Okay, then goes authorization code. Okay, now in case of authorization code, yes, you need a callback URL. Okay, you need a auth URL, as I already explained, that's a slash authorize. Now you need a token URL also, because authorization code grant type is basically a three-legged flow. Okay, you first provide your credentials. Okay, get your auth code from this particular URL, and then you pass that auth code to your token URL in order to successfully get a token. Can you see the token URL? OAuth 2 slash version 2.0 slash token. This is the difference between implicit and authorization code grant types basically. Okay, so that's all about it. Okay, let's move on. PKC, as I already explained, okay, in case of authorization code with PKC, it's authorization code with one extra parameter that you will pass, which is a code verifier. As I said, okay, it's called proof key. Okay, it's called proof key for code exchange, PKC. Okay, that proof code is this one. Okay, where is that? Yeah, this is the one, code verifier. Okay, it's a 43 to 128 character string which you can put over here, and that string will be used by your authorization server to check whether the request coming to it is a valid or legitimate request or not for the given authorization code. Okay, so if this is wrong, this code verifier is wrong, if some other malicious application is making use of the authorization code generated in the first step over here, and if it makes a request with this particular grant type, right, it will fail, because if you are passing a wrong code verifier, then it won't provide you an access token. Okay, so there's an extra step or an extra protection measure added, and this is also being made use by many applications. Okay, so that's the authorization code with the PKC. Okay, so again, this particular grant type can also be used by both your public client application as well as your confidential client applications. Okay, and then comes your password credentials, which is a resource owner credentials, which I shown over here. Resource owner password credentials, you would say ROPC. Okay, where when you select this password credentials, can you see you are going to hit the token URL directly. If you go to this, see resource owner creds, you are going to hit the token URL. Okay, so that's what I said. You are going to hit the token URL. In this case, you won't hit the authorize URL because it's a two-legged flow, only one round trip. Okay, and then you pass the required client ID and client secret. This is I'm going to explain soon. Don't worry. And most important stuff being, you are going to pass your username and password. Okay, so if I have a user basically in my Microsoft Entra ID directory, okay, that user's username and password will be sent to get the access token. Okay, uh, that's explained. And client credentials. Let me go over here. Client credentials. Go here. Yes, client credentials. In case of client credentials, okay, instead of sending a user's username and password, in case of client credentials, you will send a client ID. That's why I didn't explain in my previous grant type discussion. I didn't say anything about client ID and client secret, because this is the grant type where basically they come into picture. Okay, so the client ID is basically your application client ID. Client secret is the secret you have generated for your application. For other flows also, you need to pass the client ID, which is the required parameter in case of Microsoft Entra ID, because each and every application is basically represented as an app registration on your Azure portal basically. Okay, so in order to generate a token for that application, you have to pass this client ID. Okay, based on the various grant types, whether you need to pass the client secret or user credentials, okay, or the PKC based authorization code. Okay, that will vary based on the grant type. Okay, so in case of client credentials, it's a mandatory that you are going to hit the token URL, which I have already shown here. If you go through the diagram, client credentials only hits token, no line to slash authorize endpoint. Okay, so it will directly go to your token endpoint URL and it will get the access token for you. Again, two-legged flow. Okay, no extra round trip. Okay, so I hope you people understood the notion of this grant types when it comes to OAuth 2.0 or the OpenID Connect protocols. OpenID Connect is basically a framework built for authentication on top of OAuth 2.0. OAuth is meant for open authorization. OpenID is for the open authentication, which is yeah, developed on top of OAuth 2.0. Okay, so I hope this is pretty much clear. So always remember when to use what grant type. Okay, if it's a public application, It's a public client application running inside a browser where you have access to the browser, or the application have the capability to open a browser window. Go for implicit. Okay, you implicit to grant type, or you can go for the authorization code grant type. Okay, there is a support for these four basically. Okay, a public application can make use of implicit grant type, it can use authorization code, it can use resource owners credentials like user's name and password, or it can make use of refresh token. Okay, these are the all available options you have basically, but the preferred approach would be, it would be better to make use of authorization code or authorization code with PKC. Okay, in order to further secure your applications from any kind of security threats. Okay, now, when should you use a confidential client? Okay, when should you, what kind of grant types you have to use for a confidential client application which is running on a web server, okay, or a server machine like a microservice, a REST service. Okay, for confidential client applications, never use implicit flow. Can you see, is there any line going to implicit? No. Okay, here you must use authorization code flow. Okay, three-legged flow. You can use authorization code, you can use authorization code plus PKC. Okay, these are the two preferred approaches. Okay, apart from that, there's one more thing which is very recommended is the client credentials, because you can very securely save your application's client ID and client secret on your web server, because your web server runs on a server machine, no user has access to it. Okay, nobody can access it. Because of this security, because of this plus point that it is running on a server machine, you can very safely keep your client credentials on server machines, and that's why you can very comfortably go ahead and make use of client credentials in order to generate the access tokens. Okay, for the confidential client applications. Of course, you can make use of refresh token also in order to refresh the token whenever it expires. Okay, and here you can use the resource owner credits also, but not recommended because these are confidential client applications. Okay, so you can also make use of authorization code as already explained. Okay, so I hope you people understood the notion now, where to use, what are the various scenarios. Okay, thank you for listening, guys. In my next videos, I'm going to explain each and every grant types in detail with the timeline diagrams. How basically this authentication and authorization will take place through the use of the timeline diagrams. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.